When, a good few years ago, we had the use of the Church of the Visitation Convent, we had before us, over the altar, that beautiful mosaic of the apparition of the Sacred Heart. And hence, when celebrating, one looked up and down at love. The reason why the crucifix is still supposed to be facing the priest at the altar, if it's on the altar, and not the people, is to keep the priest focused. He is celebrating for God, and any notion of performing or dialoguing with anything or anyone less than God at that point is a misconception of that second part of the Eucharistic celebration. It's purely for God, with God and in God, with the people coming after us into God. To go into the people mentally and also visually is a huge distraction and possibly a source of deflection of grace and blessing from the celebration. The people need to be led into God and not meet themselves again or more of the human. So when we were celebrating there, facing that apparition, on a weekly basis one saw what one was doing. The Lord was pouring out without defense the fullness of his love. We notice in this very gospel that we have blood and water flowing out. All the blood had gone. Now, when it comes to things happening in the centuries that have followed, often we have things to do with blood. We have statues weeping not only tears, but also blood. There was a very curious case when I was in Italy, that of Civitavecchia. The bishop sequestered this statue that was doing things, and lo and behold, it bled in his own hands, and therefore it could no longer be kept secret. And the next day, over 50 million people saw it on the main television magazine program on Rai Uno. Our Lady, therefore, knew where to hit hard. And then when it came to analysing these tears, there was much talk throughout Italy. What does this analysis mean? They were truly tears of blood, and the curious thing was that it was male blood. What on earth does that mean? Well, one or two here or there thought perhaps it is an indication precisely that Our Lady is weeping because of the inseparable bond between her and her divine Son, and notably, and his humanity, which he received entirely from her. We know now more about Eucharistic miracles than before because of modern science, and there has been an unexpected corroboration of things when it has come to finding that various Eucharistic miracles have this one common element, that they find the same blood group coming out, which is common there in the Middle East but rare here, but also this other one, the fact that there is a configuration in it of the chromosome structure. There is one bit missing. The DNA code is only possible if it were coming from a person who had no human father. That bit is missing, and this is interesting, for science is on side in defending the virgin birth. And so we see how our Blessed Lady is hurting when it comes to the abuse of the precious blood that she herself had, as it were, donated on our behalf. She hurts. Just the other day, some of you may have been here when we had a church full of people here, when we had all the prayer groups, and all those involved with anything to do with life, praying before the pilgrim statue of our Blessed Lady of Fatima, and it was very much a sharing of her pain. In that case, specifically in the question of the shedding of other innocent blood, that of the unborn. But we all felt somehow that heaven was very close to us, that intense moment of people who really wanted to be here, and here for a good long while, somehow had our Blessed Lady with her Divine Son and all her angels very much accepting that reparation. Reparation. When it comes to specifically the Sacred Heart, we must remember the context of that unexpected intervention of heaven upon earth. It was the coldness that had come into devotion through Jansenism. People were not receiving Holy Communion. They were only really doing the very minimum, as now in many Eastern countries, in the Eastern Bloc, once a year. And when a monthly communion was being asked for, it was quite a shock to the system for the pious. It was not the practice. It meant, of course, preparation, confession, but already it was an indication. Now, what would heaven ask for? We forget how the tendency to be casual when approaching the Blessed Sacrament is actually only fairly recent, because some of us have only known that. But we need to ask ourselves, what is the optimum? It's not always the maximum. Even actually in human relationships, if a courting couple goes over the top all the time, all the time, all the time, it can actually be counterproductive. Things well felt need to be in some way respected in themselves. We don't crash into the maximum, the most holy, lightly. If we do, we somehow damage it and ourselves in the process. So maybe that Sacred Heart now would have a message something like this. Remember what you are doing. The best way you can honor me is not, perhaps, on every possible duplicated occasion, coming just again, and then not making thanksgiving, but thinking carefully what you are about to do, remembering how the saints over the centuries, when a day of Holy Communion was coming up, would be overjoyed. The saint that we feasted this last week, the patron of the youth actually, Aloysius Gonzaga, had a huge devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, and being a Jesuit novice, he was able to go quite frequently. And he would, in the period of preparation for it, orientate all his thoughts toward its reception, and then all the day afterwards in thanksgiving, afterwards. How different from our casual liturgical snacks, which perhaps hurt the Lord more than we think. I would like again to quote our Blessed Saviour himself in those wonderful apparitions of Paray-le-Monial, which, by the way, is still a high place of prayer and praise in France. He opens his bosom and reveals his love to this hidden nun who otherwise would have remained completely obscure and lost to history. "Behold this heart," he cries out, "which, notwithstanding the burning love for man with which it is consumed and exhausted, meets with no other return from the generality of Christians than sacrilege, contempt, indifference, and ingratitude." Strangely enough, we have terms there which we find again at Fatima. In the first wave of events, the cycle of apparitions of the angel, who by his physical behavior showed them what adoration meant. His forehead was touching the ground, and he taught them this notion of reparation for the outrages, sacrileges, and indifference by which he himself is offended. I mentioned before how the events that happened at Garabandal, which were filmed, of course, show many things which are interesting. Without passing any judgment on their authenticity, because that's still in the balance, I do remind you that the bishop made a U-turn on it as a result of the scientists who had been against it making a U-turn for it in public. And the fact is this: one cannot fake miracles. And therefore, when we have these strange walks backwards, up hills and so on, it's not just human. But we do have the fact that they were gravitating towards the tabernacle. The tabernacle. We also have the fact that when in situations of trance and ecstasy, they were never physically allowed to turn their back on the tabernacle and had to, in trance I say, walk backwards always before the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It's actually the protocol that one would observe before the Queen of England, or the Pope actually, traditionally as well. It's also, by the way, the reason why the priest, after the consecration, if he has the Blessed Sacrament on the altar in a ciborium, has to turn to one side when making those salutations which happen after the consecration. He's not allowed to be before the pyx with his back to it. That, by the way, is the reason, in part, why after the council the tabernacles were moved to one side, but that's a question in itself. It's because the priests knew they weren't supposed to turn their back on the Blessed Sacrament. However, there were other solutions. They could have put it higher up, or there were several ways of doing it. But that's just to explain what happened after the council. I just want to conclude. The Lord, at Paray-le-Monial, also did something else, which is less known. This devotion to the Sacred Heart would have remained at Paray-le-Monial had it not been for one factor: her spiritual father. It's one of the most beautiful cases of spiritual friendship in the annals of sanctity. Blessed and now Saint Claude de la Colombière, a Jesuit, and therefore a piston with links and cogs in the Universal Church, a man to make it happen. And when just ordained, on a first Friday sometimes, I would drift towards the church in Rome where the original painting of the Sacred Heart was. It's in the Chapel of the Sacred Heart to the right of one of the main Jesuit churches in the heart of Rome, and there you could celebrate in private. And you were looking at love, looking down at you. So this man received patiently her confidences over the years and was bound to her in God. And there is a very interesting painting which has gone round. It's the picture of the three hearts. It's the large, loving, burning heart of our Saviour. And in the two corners of the painting underneath, on the left and on the right, are two little hearts. That of these two saints who were free to love because they were free to love in God. On this feast of the Sacred Heart, learn the sanctity of warmth. Warmth in all that you do and say. The damaging word hurts the heart of our Saviour, as well as that of the person that we're trying to be good to. Our word is like a dagger when we love someone. We're only really wounded by those that we love. Be careful of pain in love.
O Christ, alive and well, O Christ of fire, here standing in the sun, O Son of Man, of essence, God of God. To Godhead higher rise into clouds that hide thee, mid light wan from looking at thy shining. Gaze upon the ball that thou didst tread, and shalt recall to order at the ordering whereon the all shall be what can alone be all. Thy toy, O King, that with a finger's power thou didst bid be, and happily combine in cause and cause entwined at perfect hour, in calcule of time's dawn, born once to shine. O Lamb, once slain, now standing, stand in might upon a cosmos dreamt upon a night. O Lamb, once slain, now standing